think that's worked. So let's give this a go, and I'll tinker with my laptop whilst Neil is talking in a moment. So welcome everyone to our weekly call. We'll have a grand week. As you may or may not be tell, I'm having slight technical problems at the moment, so I'm using my iPad rather than my laptop, which I'll play with in a second. But in the meantime, the main focus of the call today, Neil Cook from Open-Xchange, who many of you will know, has joined us in order to give us an update on DNSdist, which a recent update to it provided support for encryption on CPE, which I know generated some interest. So, as I say, Neil's kindly agreed to come on the call to sort of give an update on that functionality and no doubt answer any questions that people have. So, without further ado, let me hand over to Neil, who can give us an update on that and take any questions. So, Neil, thanks for joining. Over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so just a very quick update on who we are. So we're Power DNS. We're part of the Open-Xchange group, and we've been making DNS
Recording
for a very long time. Okay, sorry, a bit of feedback from somebody there. Someone may need to go on mute, I think. So yes, we've been making DNS since about 2001. I think we first started creating with the authoritative server. We've got our headquarters are in The Hague. We've got engineers and people kind of all over the place. And the OX group is much bigger. The Power DNS part of the group is much smaller, and we're mainly just engineering focused. Very much engineering focused team. We have 3 main products which are all open source, all GPL licensed. Very active community on GitHub, which I've put a link to there, and all packaged mainly for Linux and various BSD flavors. And 3 kind of main products. So we have a resolver, caching resolver, called Power DNS Recursor, an authoritative server, which was our first product back in the day, which is an authoritative server. And then we have DNSdist, which is what we've been talking about today. And DNSdist is a very versatile kind of a Swiss Army knife of DNS software. It's a caching DNS proxy at its heart. It's also a load balancer. It does encryption offload, and it's also an incredibly versatile policy and rules engine. It has this Lua-based policy rules engine, which you can do all kinds of things to DNS traffic in. You can examine DNS traffic. You can filter DNS traffic. You can do all kinds of traffic shaping and analysis of DNS traffic as it flows through DNSdist. So it's very cool piece of software. So in terms of what DNSdist could do before 1.8, which is the software release that I'm talking about, which was released at the end of March. If you look at what DNSdist does, it sits in front of DNS servers, either authoritative servers or recursors. Okay, so it's not a full DNS server by itself. It always needs either some kind of resolver or authoritative server behind it. And it can do DOH, DOT, or regular DO53 out front, so clients talking to it. And it can also do all of those at the back as well, which is really nice. So, you know, it basically can handle both of those protocols in and out, which is extremely helpful in terms of being able to do. And this, we'll come to this particularly on the CPE side of things, because this is where these capabilities are extremely helpful. And then this is where you can see it's sort of doing things like load balancing. You can essentially do quite clever things, particularly with layer 7 load balancing between downstream servers look at things like how fast the latency is and of the downstream servers, etc. Also, as I said, all these security features of the Lua policy engine. So things like detecting pseudo random subdomain attacks and amplification attacks and misbehaving clients and all those kind of things. But I'm not here to talk about those things today. Any questions before I move on? Just in terms of what DNSdist does. Okay. So we had some fairly straightforward objectives with 1.8. We wanted it to port it onto run on CPEs, specifically OpenWRT based CPEs. And we had some very, very severe memory and sorry, that should be CPU constraints. I mean severe. And we wanted to produce OpenWRT packages and also configurations for OpenWRT configuration. And we also wanted DNSdist to be able to support the encrypted DNS discovery standards, particularly DDR. DNR shouldn't have much to do with, or should all be external to DNSdist. And that means basically advertising itself as an encrypted resolver to local clients, so if it's acting as a CPE, and also discovering encrypted resolvers on the WAN side of being a CPE as well. So in terms of the hardware requirements, memory, this was a real big one. So if you're running on a CPE, you really have to be able to run in a very small amount of memory. So we did a huge amount of work. DNSdist typically runs on quite large servers. I mean, it can just run on a laptop level, but we've never really done any work on trying to make it run on very, very memory constrained environments. So we did a lot of work on removing quite a lot of the things in DNSdist which weren't needed in a CPE environment. So essentially removing code. I mean, obviously not just removing code in general, this is specifically for this version. And so the idea was to bring it down so that it would be a very, very memory constrained environment. It would run just fine. And of course, there's all kinds of things that you don't need in a CPE environment. It's all kinds of things that we add to be able to do, I don't know, all sorts of things like packet filtering code and these sort of things, which you don't necessarily need when you're running in a very tiny environment. You don't need to be able to run gigabits of traffic through this thing. So we managed to get it down to roughly 4.5 megabytes, which is pretty small. If you think about a modern piece of software, often your binary alone is way bigger than that. So yeah, so that was pretty impressive. And then we actually look at the minimum hardware requirements in terms of CPU. We were targeting some really sort of skanky low-end CPUs. This Qualcomm Atheros 720 megahertz CPU. These are not high-end CPUs. These are like pretty old. These have been around a while. We've been around the block, kind of, you know, warming their hands over a sort of brazier kind of CPUs. These are not the things that you get in the latest iteration of CPUs. And the idea here was that our partners and the people we were working with particularly didn't want to have to always have to, you know, get the very latest expensive CPUs hardware in. They wanted to be able to work on older CPUs. So that was one of the ideas. So yes, that was the idea. So in terms of a typical household use case, where we're looking at, you know, 5 to 10 queries per second, it has very, very low. So remember, these are very, very low spec CPUs. We're using a very small amount of CPU, so 2% CPU for regular DNS and roughly 4% CPU for encrypted DNS. So we managed to hit all of these targets, which were the targets. So yeah, it's using very, very small amount of resources. Any questions on this? Okay. Yeah, so there are packages available for OpenWRT now. OpenWRT include DNSdist 1.8 non-stripped in their master branch and we will start to host it ourselves in our own repos in a few weeks' time, stripped and non-stripped versions. So we don't do that currently, but we will do in a couple of weeks. And everything is deployed as OpenWRT packages, and we support the basically the OpenWRT package formats. We also integrate with the OpenWRT UCI, Unified Configuration Interface, and obviously that means that you support all of the sort of OpenWRT, either headless or GUI-based installation configuration formats. We can run in essentially bare metal or containers, a variety of different container, LXC or whatever, Docker containers, however they want to get to be run. We also support DHCP integration. So DNSdist actually integrates with the DHCP environment on the machine, so it learns about local network devices. So we'll actually provide DNS resolution for local DHCP host names, which was one of the requirements one of our partners had. So that's quite nice. Okay, moving on to the actual encrypted DNS stuff. So this is what this would typically look like in an unencrypted environment. You've got DNSdist running on the CPE, whether it's in a container or whatever, and obviously DO53 everywhere. So this is what it might look like in, let's say, similar if you had DNS mask or something like that running. So what happens is DNSdist is actually configured by default now. Our OpenWRT packages, by default, DNSdist will answer if a client requests a service B lookup as using the DDR protocol. It will by default self-answer with the service B record with its own encrypted DNS information. You can actually do this in standard DNSdist if you're not using the OpenWRT packages. And the way to do that is with the these two Lua parameters here. Basically, you can set up the new service record parameters function call and make that as a parameter into the spoof service action function call. And so you can essentially mimic that built-in behavior from the OpenWRT version. So we will self-answer, DNSdist will self-answer service B DDR lookups essentially. And once it's done that, then the client will actually establish, start using DOH into DNSdist or DOT that has been configured. And then the same thing on the network side. So DNSdist, you have to actually configure DNSdist with the, obviously with the backends that you're using. So once DNSdist has been configured with the network backend, you have to give it an auto upgrade key to the new server definition. So DNSdist is configured with servers with this new server definition. All you have to do is just give it this auto upgrade key. Once you've given it the auto upgrade key, it will use DDR to discover, with using the service B lookups as part of the DDR protocol, whether that network resolver has encrypted DNS capabilities. And obviously, if it does, then it will use those. So once it does, then again, if it has DOT or DOH, we'll start using those. So as you can see now, you've gone from a situation where there's no plain text DO53 on both ends, and now you've got a situation where your CPE is essentially protected encrypted DNS from the client to DNSdist and from DNSdist to the network resolver, and it's all done with DDR on both sides, which is really nice. So you've got encrypted DNS in the front of the CPE and out the back of the CPE. So obviously DNSdist doesn't do DHCP, but as far as the as far as the DNS part is concerned, it's essentially a replacement for something like DNS mask or something like that. So in terms of, sorry, any questions before I move on? No. Okay. So making this work was not an insignificant amount of work. A lot of code had to be pulled out to meet the memory requirements, a lot of performance improvements to meet the CPU requirements. OpenWRT is, you know, it's based on Linux, but it's not Linux. It's a lot of stuff that we had to go through. Hopefully this will be very useful for people in the future. I think CPE is has been right from the start a big concern for everyone in the encrypted DNS community, or just the DNS community in general, and encrypted DNS in particular. Lots of people in the telco world use CPEs, need CPEs to support encrypted DNS, and I think DNSdist, as far as I'm aware, is the only potential solution out there, certainly open source solution out there that essentially does this. Supports the encrypted, not only supports the encrypted DNS discovery standards, but just in general does encrypted DNS as a caching proxy on CPEs. So hopefully this will be just valuable to the community in general. People now know about it, that it's there. Future developments, we've now done this for OpenWRT. We are almost certainly going to support RDK in the future. And we will be supporting DNS over QUIC as well. Again, in the front and out the back as well. Probably in the next release, 1.9. It's not 100%, but probably in the next release. So yeah, that's everything I had to say about DNSdist.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Neil. Apologies for the technical problems in the background. Hopefully the echo is no longer there. That's sort of really good news to hear how the support is coming along. On DOQ support, you said possibly 1.9. Rough idea of time frame for that?
We generally have a 6-month release cadence, so that's from end of March. So that's going to be towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
So probably November time.
Brilliant. And as you say, in terms of that architecture with the CPE support from memory in the ADD work, that's what 85% of users or thereabouts use CPE and DNS forwarders. So supporting that hardware architecture is really good to see. So you brings up encryption into that.
And of course, it doesn't support the use cases. I think as we discussed on this forum before, it doesn't support the use case where you can't upgrade the CPE. You still got to upgrade the CPE because DDR doesn't support it. This use case where you don't upgrade the CPE, but as soon as you upgrade the CPE, then everything's good.
Yeah, grand. Okay, well, I know we've got quite a few people whose companies use DNSdist on the call. So does anyone have any questions? And if you do, either raise your hand or just unmute and jump in or put something in the chat if that's easier. I'm not currently seeing any hands raised, I don't think. I can't see anything in the chat, so I guess the presentation was pretty self-explanatory, unless Andrea, you were trying to come in with a question. or possibly point of clarification, as you're from Open-Xchange as well, though. No, maybe not. Okay, well, as I say, I think that was a pretty self-explanatory presentation, Neil, so thank you for that. Good news to see that's now providing support for encryption on the CPE, and hopefully some of the many users of DNSdist will be making use of that functionality in the coming months as they, as you say, update their CPE as necessary.
Yeah. And if anyone has, thoughts or requests on how they'd like to see that, evolve, then obviously let us know.
Fantastic. And thanks for doing that as you're just recuperating from your illness as well. Makes it doubly hard to do so. So thanks very much for that.
No problem.
Okay, well, let's move on. Let me see if I can share my screen despite the software problems my device seems to be having at the moment. Okay, so looks like I think you can see my slides. So just moving on from Neil's update. Quite a lot of news this week, so various things. Probably the main ones that caught my eye. You may have seen the top item on the slide, IPOC, which is a Roche Schwartz subsidiary, and we had people from Roche Schwartz on this call in the past. They've announced some updates to their software that uses API machine learning to identify and decrypt various protocols. They claim that the software does support things like TLS 1.3, ECH, DNS over HTTP, DNS over TLS, etc. So looks pretty full-featured now. May well be of interest to some of the people on this call. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I believe they're at Cisco Live this week, if anyone's attending that either in person or virtually. Also, there's a new report from the DNS Research Federation. I see him is on the call. Just looking at using the DAP.LIVE platform to measure abuse and resolution time. So it's good to see how the DAP.LIVE tool is being used for sort of real world issues. And then the other one just towards the bottom of the screen, a new report, just giving an update on some research being undertaken by the University of Twente and as well as University of California, San Diego, looking at various DNS DDoS vulnerabilities. Looks like quite an interesting report, and I'll see if I can get the authors of that report to come on this call at some point to talk through, but in the meantime, it's certainly worth a look. Then just a couple other things. One piece not really news, but which caught my eye on social media. Eric Ruskell, long-standing CTO of the Firefox team, is moving on from Mozilla. So many of us will know Eka from his active involvement in the ITF, various megaliths, etc. So no doubt he'll be moving on to pastures new, more details in due course. Yeah, that's probably it in terms of news items that caught my attention over this last week. Other things in terms of course of papers, workshop proposals, etc. well, firstly, the early bird registration cutoff for ITF 117 is midnight tonight to 3:59 UTC. So if you want to take advantage of the early bird rates, you've got a few hours left to register. Also, deadlines coming up this week, both for BOF proposals for ITF 117 and also for OWRT 41 presentations. So again, you need to get those lodged soon if you wish to do so. And as I mentioned, as we started before, there's a whole bunch of activities also running this week. So Cisco Live is running through the week, as is the first conference and WWDC. And also, for those of us not at any of those, Echo's doing a further presentation on top DNS, which Lars gave us an update on this call last week. So there's some more detail on that on a presentation tomorrow, if you wish to take advantage. And then, of course, next week is analog 88. So busy few weeks, very much in the conference season, because we'll be running into Eurodig in Finland the week after. So plenty to capture the attention if you're interested in attending any of those. And then finally from me, just firming up on a few presentations, but potentially over the next few weeks, not necessarily in this order. I hope that we should have Andrei Meshkov on to talk about implementing the support for ECH within the AdGuard software. We're trying to schedule, date not finalized yet, a client-side perspective on demands for mandatory DNS filtering, just following on from the discussion that we had with John Todd, Paul Vixie, Victoria Batola from a couple of weeks back, which had more of a technical and policy focus. So I'm trying to get a client-side perspective on that as well. And also probably towards the end of the month, discussion on zero trust access. And then as we venture into July, Peter will be talking about the joy of text. So a few interesting topics, as I say, but some of those, the exact dates to be finalised, hopefully over the next few days. With apologies for my voice, that's it from me. So we're on to any other business, slightly earlier this week than usual, but let's just see if anyone else has anything you want to bring up. So if you do, feel free to unmute and just flag anything else that is on your minds, including if there's anything further you want to add on the DAP.LIVE sort of use case. Feel free to do so, but don't feel like you have to. If not.
I can do a couple of words if you like, Andrew.
Sure.
Is that on the blog that Alex Deacon has just written, and you very kindly highlighted in your remarks. So there's been some how can I put it? Some controversy, I suppose, over the last year or so about how you measure the rate of malicious use of the DNS, and do you count the individual domain names at the registry level? Do you look at the number of individual URLs? Do you also look at, try to get a measure? Alex is looking at phishing in this blog. Do you just try to understand how to identify individual phishing attacks? And what Alex does he just paces through each of those different approaches and highlights the pros and cons of each one. and really showing that you get a very different view depending on the methodology that you use, which probably won't be massive news to anybody on this call, but we hope that we've sort of dealt with it in an evidence-based way and in an even-handed way. We're not really coming down and saying this is the only way to do it, but just highlighting that the different approaches just cast a different light on things, and probably help to explain why, say, that from a registry or registrar perspective, pure and simple way, your only sphere of influence would be the domain name itself. From that perspective, it looks like abuse rates might be quite low or going down. When you ask consumers, they say it's going up, and sometimes some of these other measures help to explain that discrepancy.
Mm-hmm. And you might find the research that I mentioned from University of California, that report may well be looking at touches on measurements and methodologies as well. So that may be worth your team take a look at. But good to see a live use case for DAP.LIVE. Well, thank you for that sort of ad hoc update. Anyone else with any news this week that you want to highlight before we finish the call? Not seeing any hands raised. I can't see anything else to chat. So probably I'd take that as nothing else on people's minds this week. If you are sort of joining WWCC or the Cisco Live, or any of the other events this week, have a fantastic week of those, and we're all looking forward to see what new hardware the Apple team will be unveiling if the rumours are true. And on that note, have a fantastic week, and look forward to catching up with everyone same time next week. So see you there.